Let's get into it a little bit. Let's have a little conflict, shall we? Well, let's have a discussion on conflict. Liane Davey, midday speaker at the Midwest Coaches Conference. How are you? Nice to see you again.
It's so nice to see you again, too. I am great. I'm great.
How about the short version of your story for coaches that are encountering you for the first time?
Long story starts with flunking calculus in first year university. And that got me into psychology, and I got really, really excited about organizational psychology. And as I worked in that space, I got interested in team dynamics. And the most interesting team dynamic of all is that dysfunctional team dynamic around friction and fighting. And that's how I've ended up here many, many years later, helping teams to kind of communicate differently, connect differently, contribute differently so they can achieve amazing things together, sort of going through conflict to the other side. So
where did the focus on teams come from?
I really, as a kid, I adored factories. I used to watch any TV show that would do a tour of how a factory works. And so I was really, I was so into that. I would nerd out on that kind of thing. But sadly, the flunking calculus meant I wasn't going to be an engineer. I wasn't going to be designing factories. But in my second year, when I had to take a bunch of courses that didn't have prerequisites, because I had to take calculus again in second year, I took this industrial organizational psychology class, and I had this insight that teams are really the machines of the knowledge economy. And it was just as much a machine with cogs and things that could create friction or get traction or any of those things. And I thought, oh, okay, this I can do. So I think that's really how I landed here, was just thinking of teams as the machines of the knowledge economy.
So to extend that metaphor, would conflict then be the thing that gums up the works and causes the machine to go off track?
Yeah, so I would say negative conflict, absolutely. Sand in the gears, right? Wears a thing down, stops it, does a lot of harm. Versus the tensions and the things that actually make machines work. Like, you need to get that traction, you need torque, all these things. So it's not that there aren't, points of contact in a healthy machine. It's that those points of contact create forward momentum as opposed to stalling the whole thing or eroding it or grinding it down. So yeah, I think the metaphor holds in that way.
What should coaches expect to hear from you at the conference in Cincinnati in September?
So hopefully some ahas, some things that really go, wow, I'm this many days old when I realized that conflict could be a force for good. So some big ideas. And then some super practical, tangible, like, well, I'm going to ask that tomorrow. So a balance of those two is what we're aiming for.
Now, one of the things I remember learning from you, first time I heard you speak years ago, probably 10, 12, maybe longer ago than that.
A while.
What was the idea that even though it may not be presenting positively, there's very helpful energy in conflict.
Oh, huge.
How can coaches, just as a teaser for where you're going, a setup for where you're going, how can coaches tap into that energy source that's there in conflict?
I think it's by labeling it, right? And so what we need to give it a vector and a label. And I would say, we're going to talk about this in the talk, like helping people understand what and whom they're fighting for. That's how you tap into the energy. I think when conflict is diffuse and when it's just kind of like a big emotion, it's just anger or grudge or any of those things, it's not constructive. It's sort of spread out over and doesn't create any of that forward momentum. When it's clear what vector it's on, no, I am moving in this direction. I am fighting for this. This is the person who is counting on me to advocate for them. When we give it direction and we give it a name, we can harness that energy and send it out to do some good, right? That's a huge part of what we need to do. And so often we just have people who they're upset, they're angry, they feel that they've been hard done by. They're just kind of stuck in this mire of emotion and not getting what they want with no directionality to it. That is so counterproductive. It's also, extremely stressful to sit in that. So we want coaches to learn how to help take that of energy and like, okay, let's put it in gear and send it off in a constructive direction.
So I love the nuance of, hey, let's put a vector on this conflict. Where's this going? How fast it's going to get us there?
I want conflict to be kinetic, right? Like if you're just sitting, and that's where our society is right now. We're just sitting entrenched in our own conflict, but conflict should be a verb. Like not a noun, not a state. Let's actually work through this, make it a vector, give it momentum, give it velocity. So, that's a huge amount of what we need to do. Take this stuff that's been stuck in conflict debt. We're just sitting in it, wallowing in it, getting more frustrated and less done. And let's actually capture it and give it forward momentum, a vector and velocity. Absolutely.
So one of the things you hint at in the description for the session is you're going to help us do that as a practical front and center kind of process and avoid the devil of passive aggressiveness.
Oh.
Okay, so how?
I'm Canadian. It's like our entire national problem. People think Canadians are nice. I think that's on all our tourist posters. I'm like, oh no, no, we just stab you in the back, not the front. We have a huge passive aggressive problem in this country. Passive aggressiveness is about two things. So passive aggressiveness is, it feels unsafe to have conflict directly. And so we need to do two things. We need to make it safer to have conflict directly and less safe, less comfortable to have it indirectly. So if I can roll my eyes in a meeting and people kind of like snicker and laugh and I'm the cool kid, well, then I can keep being passive aggressive. If someone says, I just noticed your body language there, let me know what's that about. What haven't we been saying out loud? What do we need to talk about here? If we make it less safe to be passive aggressive, and if we invite and find constructive, pro-social ways to help people bring disagreement and diversity of thought into the open. So dealing with passive aggressiveness is tipping the balance. And you can't do just one. You can't just invite it and make conflict seem safe and healthy. And you can't just have consequences and kind of crack down on passive aggressive behavior. You have to do both at the same time. So there's lots of techniques for doing each of them, but those are things that we need to help our clients to do, recognizing that you got to tip the balance on both sides.
So how does that change how coaches ask questions?
I've never thought about that question before. I think it's probably making your questions more balanced. So I think we often have our default of what we think is going to work. So we may hit half of the equation and not the other half. So what I'd be thinking as a coach is, how do I ask some questions to provoke some reflection and some thought and some optionality on the making it more comfortable side? But how do I not ignore or discount the questions that will help the person reflect on where people have been able to get away without consequence for their passive aggressive behavior, or where they might see that or how they might respond to it? And there are hard questions in that, because one of the problems with passive aggressiveness is it tends to come to you indirectly. So the manager is likely hearing about passive aggressiveness indirectly. So the coach has to be really careful with, what do you do with hearsay? And how do you ask questions to allow the person you're coaching to really wrestle with, what do I do with hearsay? If someone's come to me and said, well, they're saying this about you behind your back. So passive aggressiveness creates a really challenging issue for your client, and therefore it creates a really awesome opportunity for you to ask some great questions as a coach.
So what appropriately aggressive questions can a coach ask themselves in preparation for this session?
Yeah, so everything around understanding your own conflict baggage. So what are your own, what are the tapes playing in your head? There, I just dated myself as somebody who used to have tapes and a Walkman, but what are the tapes playing in your head about conflict? So, and I find a lot of people drawn to coaching want to help people, are very positive people, and don't have the healthiest relationship with conflict themselves. So that's where I would be starting in advance, is really trying to understand, what are my defaults about conflict? What do I do? What happens in different domains of my life when I, am worried about something?
Now, the theme of the conference is flow boldly. So starting with a day around getting into a flow state and actually doing deep work with yourself, and ending with a challenge to boldly chase your vision.
Yeah.
So how does conflict bridge those two?
Yeah, well, I think it's a really interesting idea because, of course, one of the biggest interrupters to flow is conflict, right? So if we go back to this, we want flossing, not root canal. We want conflict to be a habit, not an event. That fits beautifully into the flow theme. We want conflict to be part of your natural flow. When it's not the sort of dam that stops all progress of the flowing river, then think of how bold you can dream. Think of what's possible when you're not afraid or hesitant of, I can't say this because that'll create conflict, or we can't be this ambitious because somebody's not going to like it. So I think if we can think of ways that conflict can become part of your flow, as opposed to walking in thinking conflict is the great dam in the flow, then boy, can we be bold following that.
Okay, so I can almost sense someone listening to this interview getting more and more tense with all this conversation around conflict.
Yeah.
And thinking, maybe I'll get coffee during that session. What would you say to them?
Oh, we're going to have fun. I promise. I'm going to, you know how it's going to be fun? It's going to be fun because I'm going to tell you all the different ways I've figured it out to mess it up. I'm going to give you all my personal stories about how I get it wrong. You'll have a blast just laughing at me and being that person who only exists as a warning to others. That'll be me. You'll have plenty of fun to laugh at me. But I think the biggest thing is that as you're sitting there laughing at Liane, you'll also have some insights about, wow, like I could unlock so much in my own coaching practice. I could unlock so much for my clients. I could unlock things with my family, with my kids, with my church group. All of these things become possible when you figure out how to use conflict as a force for good. So we'll be laughing a lot, probably laughing at me a little. But I think it's the power of feeling like, wow, with this new mindset and a few new skills in my repertoire, I'm pretty excited.
I admire this about you, is that you tackle very serious topics with a tremendous sense of humor. Where does that come from?
I think when you do deal with really, really tough topics all the time, so it's a bit of my Mary Poppins theory, right? You do need the spoonful of sugar to help the medicine go down. I'm doling out a lot of medicine. So there has to be authenticity. I have to be willing to say, hey, look, the only reason I know this is a mistake is because I made it first. I have to be able to laugh at, how awkward it is when we kind of get it wrong.
If you're watching this and saying, okay, she seems like someone I could listen to about this, go to Liane's LinkedIn profile before the conference. She dances that dance beautifully of complex, challenging topics. That's the cake, and the icing is a dose of humor, which leads to the flossing and the root canals, obviously, just to continue the metaphor. Yeah. But I appreciate that teaching style. How does that show up in your coaching when you're coaching a team?
Yeah, so when I'm working with a team, I'm absolutely, that humor is coming in. And, it's often in trying to use metaphors that do allow me to kind of go in that side door or have them go, oh, okay, I never thought about it that way. It's definitely in being willing to be self-deprecating and candid about all the mistakes I've made, for sure. Because humor just makes it a lot easier to have these really difficult conversations. But it always has to feel like I'm laughing with you not laughing at you, because when you're coaching a team, if there isn't just a huge amount of empathy for how hard this is, I think it's a real turnoff. So
how did the work world these last several years get to be so hard?
Yeah, well, the whole world is really hard, right? So I think part of it is, I did a LinkedIn post not that long ago about how much more emotionality there is in the workplace lately, just asking people. And I wrote a blog with a number of reasons why I thought that was true. So certainly financial pressures for lots of people, like where interest rates went, what their mortgages are costing them, what the inflation is doing. So, there's that kind of pressure. And then you hear about, some huge Intel laying off 15,000 people. So there's financial pressures. There's just an incredible, so I'm talking about this in the new book I'm working on. In 2016, Gardner research said the average organization implemented 2 organizational level transformations each year, and about 75% of employees were behind those. They backed them and thought they were a good idea. 6 years later, that number was up to 10. So a 500% increase in organizational transformations in 6 years. The human brain doesn't evolve in 6 years to suddenly be better at coping with that level of disruption. So there's that. And then just look at, the percentage of kids struggling with anxiety and mental health issues. Well, their parents don't sort of punch the punch clock and come in and leave that all behind. They're worried and stressing. They're probably getting texts from their kid all day that say things that, make them fret and worry. So life is heavy. And so you put that in, and then you add to it, SMART goals and accountability and, 22 hours of meetings and 11 hours of email. And things are hard. It's hard. And there's this, we are distracted more often, we're triggered more often, and we're burned out more often. So it's not a good place from which to cope with the complexity of what we're facing. So that's what the new book is about. I'm super excited. But I think that's our reality. And so coaches have such a powerful role right now in helping people kind of wrangle all those things.
Awesome. Dr. Liane Davey, coming to the Midwest Coaches Conference in Cincinnati at the end of September. Thank you so much for sitting down and talking.
Can't wait to see everybody there. Looking forward to it.